Modern prepping prides itself on readiness, but Native Americans achieved survival mastery without gear, weapons, or tech. 7 lost techniques could make the difference between life and death, yet almost no one today practices them. Why are preppers blind to this? Native Americans didn't need weather apps or fancy equipment to survive brutal storms and harsh winters. They read the land like it was a living, breathing map that whispered secrets most people completely missed. Take animal behavior, for instance. When normally scattered deer suddenly huddled together in tight groups, it meant a vicious winter was coming fast. Squirrels frantically gathering nuts weeks earlier than usual. That was nature's alarm bell screaming that food would be scarce for months. Birds flying in weird patterns or disappearing altogether told experienced native trackers that a massive storm was about to slam the region within hours, not days. But animals were just one piece of the puzzle. Cloud shapes held their own language. Thick, heavy clouds sitting low meant bone-chilling cold was moving in. Wispy, high clouds stretching across the sky like stretched cotton warned of wind changes that could bring deadly blizzards. Then there's the moon. When you saw those eerie rings glowing around it, smart tribes knew to batten down immediately because harsh weather was guaranteed within 24 hours. The weird part is how they used their own senses as living weather instruments. Experienced Native Americans could actually smell changes in the air pressure. That metallic, sharp scent before a thunderstorm. They detected it hours before anyone else even noticed the first cloud. Their skin became a barometer too. Sudden humidity changes or that prickly feeling on your arms meant atmospheric pressure was dropping fast. Well, the land itself was probably their most reliable forecaster. Cracked soil patterns told them where water would flow during heavy rains and where flash floods might trap them. Stream levels dropping suddenly meant either drought was coming or heavy rains upstream would soon send a wall of water rushing down. Smart, right? Let's not forget the subtle hints that saved countless lives. When underground springs started bubbling differently or making strange sounds, it meant the water table was shifting, often because of massive weather systems approaching from hundreds of miles away. Even tree behavior mattered, leaves turning their backs to the wind or certain flowers closing up tight during what seemed like perfect weather meant atmospheric pressure was about to go haywire. And the incredible thing is, they taught these skills to children as naturally as we teach kids to tie their shoes. Every family member became a walking weather station, constantly scanning for these natural warning signs. No batteries required, no satellite feeds needed, just pure observation and generations of accumulated wisdom. This kind of weather prediction wasn't just impressive, it was absolutely critical for survival. Missing these signs meant getting caught in the open during killer storms, losing precious hunting time, or failing to gather enough resources before brutal conditions hit. Makes sense why they became so incredibly good at it, but reading the weather was only half the battle. Once those warning signs appeared, they needed shelter fast. And that's where their genius for building instant protection really shined. When you're caught in a sudden storm or nightfall drops faster than expected, Native Americans didn't panic about finding the nearest hotel. They turned nature itself into instant shelter using whatever surrounded them. A hollow tree became a ready-made fortress against wind and rain. Large rock overhangs transformed into cozy caves. Even a simple lean-to made from fallen branches could mean the difference between life and death. But here's where most people mess up completely. They sit directly on cold ground. That's like volunteering to freeze from the bottom up. Native tribes knew better. They'd gather thick pine boughs, creating a natural mattress that kept body heat from bleeding straight into the earth. Pine needles work like tiny air pockets, trapping warmth underneath you. Smart, right? Then there's the wind problem. A howling gale can steal your body heat faster than you'd believe possible. So they'd position themselves behind rock outcroppings or fallen logs, creating natural windbreaks. The idea wasn't just blocking wind, it was about trapping heat in small pockets around their bodies. Think of it like making a mini greenhouse effect with whatever nature provided. Animal skins became their ultimate weather barrier when available. But even without hunting success, they'd stack pieces of bark like natural shingles, layering them to shed rain and snow. Birch bark worked especially well because it's naturally waterproof. And the weird part is, these bark shelters often stayed warmer than modern tents because they breathed just enough to prevent dangerous condensation buildup. The real survival secret, though, was shared body heat. When temperatures dropped to life-threatening levels, pride took a back seat to staying alive. Multiple people would press close together, sometimes wrapping themselves in the same animal hide. Your grandmother might blush, but this technique saved countless lives during brutal winter storms. Speed mattered more than perfection in emergency situations. A quick shelter built in 20 minutes beat a fancy one that took 2 hours, especially when frostbite was creeping in. They'd wedge branches between rocks, pile snow against the sides for insulation, and crawl inside before hypothermia could take hold. Let's not forget the psychological aspect here. Having any shelter, even a basic one, gave people hope and helped them think clearly. Panic kills faster than cold sometimes. A simple windbreak made from stacked stones could provide enough protection to let someone's mind focus on the next survival step instead of just shivering helplessly. What made these techniques truly brilliant was their adaptability. Desert regions called for different approaches than snowy mountains, but the core principles remained the same. Get off the ground, block the wind, trap your body heat, and use whatever materials nature offered in that exact spot. Speaking of staying warm, shelter was just the beginning. Once you had protection from the elements, the next challenge was creating fire in conditions that would make modern matches completely useless. You've got shelter sorted, and you can read nature's warning signs like a pro. But here's the thing that separates the living from the frozen: fire. Native Americans didn't carry fancy waterproof matches or butane lighters. They had something way more reliable. Meet Amadou, the unsung hero of wilderness survival. This isn't your garden variety mushroom. It's a bracket fungus that grows on birch trees, and when prepared correctly, it becomes nature's best fire-starting material. The weird part is how simple the process actually was. First, they'd harvest the fungus and slice it thin. Then came the magic: boiling it in water mixed with wood ash or urine. Yeah, you heard that right. The ammonia helped break down the fibers. After boiling, they'd pound it flat with stones until it felt like leather. This created a material so good at catching sparks that it could ignite even when slightly damp. But why did Amadou work so well when everything else failed? The preparation process created tiny, fluffy fibers that caught the smallest spark and held it long enough to transfer to tinder. Rain, snow, high humidity, didn't matter. One spark from flint and steel, and you had fire. Then there's the brilliant part most people miss. Native Americans never really started fires from scratch every single time. They carried fire with them. Using specially prepared containers made from bark or hollow gourds, they'd transport glowing coals wrapped in amadou or punkwood. These portable fire sources could stay alive for hours, sometimes even days. The flint and steel method was their backup plan, not their first choice. They'd strike the steel against flint, sending sparks onto a prepared piece of amadou. The amadou would catch and smolder, creating a glowing coal that could then ignite dry grass, bark strips, or other tinder materials. Makes sense, right? Let's not forget how they kept fires going in brutal weather. Windscreens made from rocks or logs protected flames from getting blown out. They'd build fires in shallow pits to trap heat and reduce wind exposure. During heavy rain, they constructed overhead covers using bark or hides stretched between trees. Well, here's something that'll blow your mind. They even figured out how to start fires underwater. By using birch bark tubes filled with amadou and creating air pockets, they could protect the initial flame long enough to establish a proper fire once they surfaced. The real genius wasn't just in making fire, but in maintaining it constantly. Fire meant survival, so letting it die was never an option. They'd bank coals under ash before sleeping, keeping them alive through the night. Come morning, a few gentle breaths and some dry tinder brought the flames roaring back to life. Speaking of staying alive through harsh conditions, having fire solved only part of the survival puzzle. Getting food into your belly without modern cookware, that required some seriously clever thinking. Ever tried making soup without a pot? Sounds impossible, right? Well, Native Americans figured out how to boil water using nothing but rocks and animal hide. This wasn't some desperate last resort. It was their go-to cooking method for thousands of years. Here's how the magic worked. First, they'd heat smooth stones in a roaring fire until they glowed red hot. Not just any rocks would do. River stones were perfect because they held heat longer and didn't crack easily. Sharp or porous rocks, those would explode when heated, sending deadly fragments flying everywhere. While the stones heated up, they'd prepare their pot. Sometimes this meant a waterproof basket woven so tightly it could hold liquid. Other times, they used fresh animal hides stretched between wooden stakes, creating a natural bowl. The hide never touched the flames directly. That's the genius part. Once those rocks reached scorching temperatures, the real show began. Using wooden tongs or split sticks, they'd carefully lift the glowing stones and drop them straight into the water-filled container. The water would instantly start bubbling and hissing like a science experiment gone wild. Steam would shoot up in dramatic clouds. But here's where it gets clever. As each stone cooled down, they'd fish it out and replace it with another red-hot rock from the fire. This constant rotation kept the water at a rolling boil for as long as needed. A skilled cook could maintain perfect boiling temperatures for hours using this method. The versatility was incredible. They could cook thick stews, render animal fat, purify questionable water, or even brew medicinal teas. The hot stones worked so well that some tribes preferred this method over direct fire cooking, especially when dealing with delicate ingredients that might burn. Then there's the practical side that modern campers completely miss. No heavy metal pots to carry around, no scorched cookware to scrub clean. If the hide container got damaged, they'd simply make another one. The stones could be reused indefinitely, and they were literally everywhere. Some tribes got so good at this technique, they could tell exactly how hot a stone was just by looking at its color. Deep red meant ready to go. Orange red? Too hot. It might crack the container. They had it down to a science. The weird part is how fast this actually worked. Modern tests show that stone boiling could bring water to temperature almost as quickly as a metal pot over direct flame. Those ancestors weren't messing around with slow, primitive methods. They had efficiency figured out. This technique saved lives during harsh winters when metal tools weren't available. It also meant they could cook safely anywhere they found stones and water, turning any location into a temporary kitchen. Speaking of food preservation and making meals last through tough times, there's another skill that kept entire tribes fed for months. Getting close enough to an animal to actually catch it. That's where most modern hunters would probably give up and order pizza instead. But Native Americans turned invisibility into an art form, and their techniques were so good they could practically walk up and tap a deer on the shoulder. The secret started with becoming part of the landscape itself. They'd smear mud, charcoal, and plant juices across their skin until they looked like walking trees. Earth tones weren't a fashion choice. They were survival gear. Brown, green, and gray made them disappear against rocks, bushes, and shadows. Some tribes even stuck actual leaves and twigs into their hair. Ridiculous? Maybe. Effective? Absolutely. Movement was everything, though. You could look like a perfect bush, but if you moved like a clumsy human, every animal within a mile would bolt. They learned to freeze completely when prey looked their direction, sometimes holding impossible positions for 20 minutes or more. Their patience made modern hunters look like hyperactive children. Then there's the wind factor most people completely ignore. Animals smell humans coming from ridiculous distances, so tribes always position themselves downwind, letting the breeze carry their scent away from their target. They'd even rub themselves with pine needles, sage, or dirt to mask any remaining human smell. Smart, right? But stealth hunting wasn't just about getting close. It was about staying quiet during the actual catch. Bows made almost no noise compared to shouting and chasing animals around. Blowguns were even quieter, perfect for small game like rabbits or birds. Some hunters could nail a squirrel from 30 feet away without making a sound. Traps took the silence to the next level. Deadfalls, snares, and pit traps worked while the hunters slept. No noise, no chase, no missed shots, just patient engineering that caught dinner automatically. The weird part is these traps were so well designed, they'd often catch multiple animals over several days. Let's not forget their knowledge of animal behavior patterns. They knew exactly where deer would drink water, which trails rabbits used most often, and when certain birds would land in specific trees. This wasn't guessing. This was scientific observation passed down through generations. Bare hands fishing was another level entirely. Some tribes could catch fish with nothing but quick reflexes and perfect timing. They'd stand motionless in shallow water until fish swam close, then grab them faster than you could blink. The diversity of their wild food sources was staggering. Over 500 different plants, roots, berries, nuts, and mushrooms filled their diet. They knew which ones were safe, which ones had medicine properties, and exactly when each one would be ready for harvesting. All this hunting and gathering created one major problem, though. What do you do with all that food once you've caught it? Because fresh meat spoils fast, and winter doesn't care how good your hunting skills are. Here's the thing about preservation that most people get completely wrong. They think it's some complex modern science when Native Americans had it figured out thousands of years ago. While we're stressing about refrigerators going out during power outages, they were keeping meat fresh for months using nothing but smoke, sun, and some seriously clever tricks. The smoking process wasn't just about flavor, though that was a nice bonus. Tribes would build special racks about 4 feet off the ground, then create smoky fires underneath using specific woods. Oak, hickory, and fruit woods worked best because they burned slow and steady. The trick was keeping the temperature low enough to dry the meat without cooking it. Too hot and you'd get jerky that spoiled in days. Too cool and bacteria would party all over your winter food supply. Fish got the royal treatment too. Salmon runs meant entire communities would work together, filleting hundreds of fish and hanging them on massive wooden frames. The salty ocean air combined with constant smoke created fish that could last an entire year. Some tribes even developed a fish cake recipe that was basically ancient protein bars, nutritious, portable, and surprisingly tasty. But wait, it gets better. Fruits and vegetables had their own preservation methods that make modern freeze-drying look amateur. Berries were mashed into thick sheets and sun-dried on flat rocks until they became leathery fruit roll-ups. These could be stored in waterproof baskets and would stay good for years. Seriously, years. Then there's the underground storage system that's pure genius. Certain tribes would dig pits lined with stones and bark, creating natural root cellars that maintained steady, cool temperatures year-round. They'd store everything from nuts to dried corn in these earth refrigerators. The ground provided insulation that kept food cool in summer and prevented freezing in winter. Let's not forget about their version of natural refrigeration. Some clever groups would use cold mountain streams as their personal cooling system. They'd weave tight baskets, fill them with preserved foods, and anchor them underwater using heavy stones. The constant cold water flow kept everything chilled better than any icebox. Fish, meat, even certain vegetables could be stored this way for weeks. The weird part is how they figured out which preservation method worked best for different foods. Trial and error over generations taught them that certain berries needed specific drying times, while particular cuts of meat required exact smoking temperatures. This wasn't guesswork, it was food science passed down through careful observation and practice. Modern preppers spend thousands on freeze dryers and vacuum sealers, but these techniques required nothing more than fire, air, water, and patience. The results often lasted longer and tasted better than anything coming out of today's preservation equipment. Speaking of making things last and taste good, these storage masters had another trick up their sleeves that's even more impressive. They wasted absolutely nothing. Native Americans treated animals like walking hardware stores. Every single part had a purpose. Nothing got tossed aside because throwing away useful stuff meant you might die later when winter hit hard. Take a buffalo, for example. Most people think meat, maybe hide for clothes. Wrong. These folks saw dozens of tools in one animal. Bones became needles, scrapers, and arrow points. The sinew, that stringy stuff connecting muscles, made threads stronger than anything you'll find at craft stores today. Animal brains got mashed up for tanning hides. Sounds gross? Well, it worked better than expensive leather conditioners. Fish bones turned into perfect sewing needles, small, sharp, and they already had holes. The intestines? Waterproof containers for storing everything from water to medicines. Even hooves got boiled down into glue that could hold your life together, literally. But here's where it gets really clever. Plant fibers became their rope, baskets, sleeping mats, and even medicine. Bark strips were woven into containers so tight they held water without leaking. Cedar bark made soft diapers for babies and bandages for wounds. Pine needles got brewed into vitamin C tea that prevented scurvy long before sailors figured that trick out. The weird part is how they turned trash into treasure. Broken pottery pieces became scrapers. Old animal teeth made perfect cutting tools. Feathers weren't just pretty. They became arrow fletching, insulation, and ceremonial items. Nothing stayed broken or useless for long. Then there's the smart storage system they developed. Animal bladders became water bottles that never broke when dropped. Hollowed-out gourds stored everything from seeds to medicines. Large animal hides got sewn into portable containers that could carry a family's entire life from place to place. Modern preppers spend hundreds on gear that breaks after one season. These folks made tools that lasted years using stuff others would step over without noticing. Makes sense, right? When your life depends on your equipment, you don't buy cheap. Plant roots provided soap, medicine, and food, sometimes all from the same plant. Willow bark contained aspirin. Cattail roots were edible starch. Even pine sap had multiple jobs: waterproofing, medicine, and emergency food when nothing else was available. And the brilliant part about this system, it was completely renewable. Animals reproduced, plants grew back, and natural materials were everywhere. No supply chains, no shipping delays, no worrying about stores running out of stock during emergencies. Every scrap of material got used, reused, then used again until it literally fell apart. Even then, the pieces often found new purposes. This wasn't just being thrifty, it was survival engineering at its finest. Today's throwaway culture would shock these resourceful people. They proved that with creativity and knowledge, almost anything could become exactly what you needed to stay alive.